Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I was born with a rare condition that affected the bones in my right foot. My parents noticed something was wrong when I started learning to walk. I would constantly trip and cry in pain. The doctors diagnosed me when I was 18 months old, and since then, I've had more surgeries than I can count on both hands. The most significant surgery happened when I was in second grade. The doctors needed to take bone from my hip and put it in my foot to help it develop properly. I was scared, but my parents assured me everything would be okay. They were right about the surgery. It went perfectly. What they couldn't have predicted was what happened afterward. I had to use a wheelchair for several months while my foot and hip healed. Most of the time, it wasn't too bad. My classmates were helpful, and the school tried to accommodate my needs. That is, until that one day that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. Our school was big on outdoor education. We had these special classes in the woods behind the school at least once a week. Usually, I could watch from the paved pathway, but this one day, they were going deeper into the woods where my wheelchair couldn't go. That morning, my teacher pulled me aside. She told me I wouldn't be able to join the class for nature studies that day. When I asked if I could go to another class instead, she brushed off my suggestion. She said she had something special planned for me. Then she pulled out some coloring books from her desk drawer and handed them to me, saying these would keep me occupied while they were gone. Before I could protest, she turned to address the class, telling everyone to line up at the door because they were heading to the woods. I watched as my classmates filed out, a few of them giving me sympathetic looks. Then, just like that, I was alone, on the fourth floor, in a wheelchair. No one else knew I was there. The first hour wasn't so bad. I colored and tried to make the best of it. By the second hour, I was getting worried. I needed to use the bathroom, but I couldn't wheel myself there alone. There were heavy doors in the way that I couldn't manage by myself. By lunchtime, I was hungry, thirsty, and scared. I could hear other classes in distant rooms, but no one came by. My lunch was in my backpack, but I couldn't reach it from my wheelchair. I started crying, wondering if I'd be stuck there all day. It wasn't until the end of the school day that anyone realized something was wrong. My mom always picked me up from my classroom because of the wheelchair, and when she arrived, she found me alone, hungry, and terrified. She asked me what happened and where everyone was, her voice shaking with panic. Through tears, I explained that they had gone to the woods and the teacher had told me to stay here. I've never seen my mom so angry. She immediately wheeled me to the principal's office. My dad arrived 20 minutes later, and I thought he was going to explode. He demanded answers about how they could leave his daughter alone on the fourth floor in a wheelchair. The principal tried to calm the situation by saying he had no idea this had happened and it wasn't school policy. The teacher attempted to defend herself by saying she didn't think it would be a problem since I had coloring books to keep me busy. My mom cut her off, pointing out that I was only 8 years old and asking what would have happened if there had been a fire or other emergency, noting that I couldn't even reach my lunch or go to the bathroom. The next few weeks were intense. My parents sued both the teacher and the school. The local newspaper got wind of the story and published it on the front page. The teacher was fired and lost her teaching license. She'd never be allowed to work with children again. The school had to pay a significant settlement, which my parents put into a college fund for me. They also implemented new policies for students with disabilities and moved my classroom to the first floor. I got my first cell phone that week, a basic one just for emergencies. The aftermath was even more interesting. The teacher had to go back to university for a completely different degree since she couldn't teach anymore. She changed her name and moved to a different state. Apparently, having your negligence plastered all over the local news makes it hard to live in the same town. Some of my old classmates told me their parents ran into her working at a small accounting firm 2 states over. She was using a different name, but they recognized her. Apparently, she saw them too and practically ran out of the office. I guess karma has a way of following you even when you try to run from it. My foot eventually healed and I graduated from the wheelchair to crutches, then to regular walking. I still have a slight limp, but it doesn't stop me from doing anything I want to do. These days, I'm studying to become a disability rights lawyer. I want to make sure no other kid goes through what I did, being left behind and forgotten just because they're different. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition that affects my joints and muscles. It started with what I thought was just regular fatigue after my college classes, but it quickly progressed to the point where some days I could barely get out of bed. The doctors ran countless tests before finally figuring out what was wrong. The good news was that they could treat it. The bad news? The treatment is ongoing and some days are still really rough. I'm 23 now, and while I can manage most days with medication, I still have flare-ups that make walking extremely difficult. That's why I occasionally need to use those motorized shopping carts at stores. Trust me, I'd much rather walk. Those carts are slow and hard to maneuver, but sometimes it's either that or not getting groceries at all. My older sister has been my rock through all of this. She's incredibly protective, especially since our parents live in another state. She usually does the shopping for both of us, but that day I was feeling pretty good and wanted to get out of the apartment. Plus, she was picking me up afterward anyway, so it seemed like perfect timing. Everything was going fine until I reached the cereal aisle. I was carefully maneuvering the cart around some boxes that had been left on the floor when I heard an angry voice behind me. An older woman in her 50s started yelling at me, claiming that some people actually needed those carts, her tone dripping with sarcasm and anger. I tried to explain that I did need the cart due to my medical condition, but she wouldn't let me finish. She interrupted me, scoffing at my age and accusing me of being just another young person abusing the carts for fun. She insisted I was probably just lazy. I attempted again to explain my autoimmune condition, but she cut me off by pushing her shopping cart against my motorized one. She started demanding that I get off the cart immediately, ranting about how her arthritis was acting up, and she refused to walk around while some kid joyrided on disability equipment. I tried to warn her to stop pushing her cart against mine, but before I could finish my sentence, she rammed her cart full force into mine. The impact knocked me sideways and I fell hard onto the floor. Pain shot through my hip and shoulder as I landed. My condition makes my joints especially sensitive to impact, and I knew immediately this was going to trigger a major flare-up. I lay there trying to catch my breath, while this woman stood over me ranting about kids these days, and how she was going to report me to management for abusing disability services. A small crowd had gathered, but no one stepped in. That's when my sister arrived. She'd come in to help me load the groceries, since I'd texted her earlier that I was almost done shopping. She burst into the aisle, screaming in shock and anger at what she was witnessing. The next few seconds were chaos. My sister, who I should mention teaches self-defense classes, saw me on the floor and completely lost it. She stormed over, and before anyone could react, she'd thrown a perfect left hook that sent Karen stumbling backward into a display of cereal boxes. My sister started yelling at her about how the disability cards were for people who needed them, calling her an ignorant witch. She furiously explained that I had an autoimmune disease affecting my mobility, demanding to know who she thought she was to assault disabled people. Karen was sprawled among scattered cereal boxes, holding her jaw and wailing like she was auditioning for a soap opera. Store security showed up pretty quickly after that, and they had quite a situation to deal with. The whole thing was caught on the store's security cameras. Karen tried to press charges against my sister, claiming she was viciously attacked without provocation. That fell apart pretty quickly when the police saw the footage of her assaulting me with her shopping cart. Several witnesses also came forward to confirm that she'd been harassing me and refused to listen when I tried to explain my condition. Karen ended up being charged with assault and had to be taken away in an ambulance because she claimed her neck was injured from hitting the shelf, though the ER doctors found nothing wrong with her. My sister got off with a warning since she was defending a disabled person from an active assault, though the police did remind her that punching people isn't the best solution. I did end up having a pretty bad flare-up from the fall and had to increase my medication temporarily. The store manager was incredibly apologetic and offered us a year of free grocery delivery service, which was actually really helpful on my bad days. A week later, we found out Karen was a local substitute teacher. Well, she was, until the video of her assaulting a disabled person went viral in our community. The school district decided they didn't want someone with her judgment issues working with children. I hadn't been home in almost 2 years. Living abroad as an English teacher in South Korea had been an amazing experience. But after my contract ended, I knew it was time to head back. The thing is, when you live somewhere for that long, you accumulate quite a bit of stuff. I'd already shipped most of my belongings through a freight service, but I still had one large suitcase full of gifts for my family and some personal items I didn't trust to ship. I checked the airline's baggage allowance multiple times, 23 kilograms for checked luggage. I'd weighed my suitcase at home using a bathroom scale, and it showed 22 kilograms. Perfect, I thought. But, oh boy, was I in for a surprise at the airport. The check-in counter was being managed by this woman who looked like she'd never smiled in her life. Stone-faced, she gestured for my passport and ticket without even a greeting. I hefted my suitcase onto the scale, and that's when things got interesting. Without even looking up at me, she flatly announced that I'd need to pay $120 for excess baggage. When I questioned her about it, she explained that my suitcase was 25 kilograms, which was 2 kilograms over their limit. I protested, telling her that I had weighed it at home and it was under the limit. She dismissed my concerns with a cold response about their scales being calibrated daily and repeated the $120 fee requirement. She had this smug look on her face like she was enjoying this. The line behind me was getting longer and I could feel people getting restless. But $120, that was highway robbery for 2 kilograms. I asked if there were any other options, saying that the fee seemed excessive for just 2 kilograms. She responded with two choices: either pay the fee or remove items to meet the weight requirement. That's when I had my light bulb moment. I looked at my suitcase, then at my carry-on backpack, which was already at its limit, and made my decision. Right there in front of everyone, I dropped my suitcase to the floor and unzipped it. The counter lady's eyes widened as I started pulling out clothes. First came my thick winter jacket, worn, then my lightweight autumn jacket, also worn. A spring windbreaker? Why not? I put on a beanie, then balanced 2 pairs of sunglasses on my head, one on my face, one pushed up like a headband. I even wrapped a scarf around my neck for good measure. By now, people in the line were openly laughing. Someone took out their phone and started recording. The counter lady's face had gone from smug to increasingly annoyed. A passenger from the line called out that this was the best thing they'd seen all day. Another one started cheering me on, telling me to work it and give them a runway walk. I struck a pose which got even more laughs. The counter lady tried to stop me, saying this was highly inappropriate. I innocently responded that I was just making sure my luggage met the weight requirement. I lifted the now lighter suitcase back onto the scale, 22.8 kilograms. I cheerfully pointed out that we were now under the limit. The counter lady looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but she couldn't say anything because technically I wasn't breaking any rules. She silently tagged my bag and handed me my boarding pass. When I waddled away looking like a fashion-confused explorer ready for any weather, people in the line actually applauded. A security guard walking by had to turn away to hide his laughter. The aircraft's air conditioning was on full blast during the flight, so I ended up being one of the few passengers who was actually comfortable throughout the 13-hour journey. Several people who'd seen the show at check-in kept giving me thumbs up during the flight, and one flight attendant even quietly complimented my earlier performance while serving drinks. When we landed, I stuffed all the extra clothes back into my suitcase. When I was leaving the baggage claim area, I spotted the same counter lady who was apparently catching the return flight. The look on her face when she saw me wheeling my perfectly packed suitcase, now dressed normally, was insane. After my grandmother passed away last year, I found myself lost in a way I never expected. She was the one who taught me everything I knew about cooking, but baking was something we never got around to. She always talked about teaching me her famous apple pie recipe, but time wasn't on our side. So when I saw an advertisement for a professional baking course, I knew it was something I had to do, both for myself and in her memory. The course wasn't cheap. I had to work extra shifts in my retail job for 3 months to afford it, but I was determined. When I finally walked into that kitchen classroom, the excitement was overwhelming. The head chef gathered all 20 of us and explained we'd be working in pairs throughout the course. Since none of us knew each other, he decided to do a random draw to assign partners. That's how I got paired with her. She was in her early 20s in a wheelchair and seemed friendly enough at first. The first week was mostly theory, learning about different types of flour, the science behind leavening agents, that sort of thing. When we finally started our practical classes, things took a turn. Each session was 5 hours long, and we had our own station right next to the chef's demonstration area. That's when I started to see her true colors. When we began our first practical session, she immediately took control, telling me she would handle all the measuring and mixing while I could do the cleanup afterward. When I suggested we could alternate tasks so we both could learn everything, she refused, insisting she needed to prove she could keep up with everyone else and that I should just trust her with this. Every time she measured ingredients, the proportions were wrong. When she mixed batters, they were either overmixed or undermixed. Our bakes kept coming out wrong. Dense cakes, tough pastries, cookies that spread into one giant mess. Whenever I brought up the issues, she would use her disability as an excuse, telling me that mixing wasn't easy in her position and that I would just have to understand things wouldn't be perfect. The chef would walk by, see our disasters, and still praise her. He would constantly tell her how wonderfully she was doing, considering her situation. She took this as encouragement to take on even more tasks, while I was relegated to being basically a janitor. Here I was, paying hundreds of dollars to learn baking, and all I was learning was how to clean up messes. After a bad class where she ruined an entire batch of croissant dough, something that took 3 hours to make, I decided to speak with the chef privately. I explained my concerns about not getting the hands-on experience I had paid for. The chef responded by telling me we needed to be understanding of her condition. I had to explain that this wasn't about her disability, but about me not learning anything while paying full price for this course. He argued that it wouldn't look good to separate us, but I stood my ground, telling him I wasn't there to look good, but to learn how to bake. After more back and forth, he finally agreed to let me work independently. That's when the drama really started. She began telling everyone that I had abandoned her because of her disability. She made sure the whole class knew about what she called my discriminatory behavior. Other students started giving me cold looks, and some even confronted me. One student told me I was being insensitive, while another said I should be ashamed of myself. But then something unexpected happened. During our next class, while working alone, I produced a perfect batch of Danish pastries. The chef couldn't hide his surprise at my sudden improvement. A few classes later, my former partner's new helper, one of the teaching assistants, finally spoke up. The assistant reported concerns about deliberate sabotage of materials and unwillingness to follow instructions. Turns out she had been intentionally mismeasuring ingredients and ignoring proper techniques, using her disability as a shield from criticism. The chef finally saw what I'd been dealing with all along. She was asked to either follow proper procedures and accept guidance or leave the course. She left, but not before trying to post about me on social media. Fortunately, several classmates who had witnessed everything came to my defense, sharing their own observations of her behavior. The chef eventually apologized to me privately for not addressing the situation sooner. I finished the course at the top of my class, and now I'm working on perfecting my grandmother's apple pie recipe with my new skills. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.